Okay, I'm gonna cover Aristotle's ethics in this video. I was going to cover the whole book, however, there's a lot to cover. I think I'm just gonna do 1 through 5, and then I'm just gonna summarize the rest, but if somebody needs me to look at something in detail, or something is not clear, I would be more than willing to help out. I have tons of notes. Even though I returned the book to the library, I could easily just look at it again. Okay, so Aristotle begins the Ethics by asserting that activities performed in an individual's life and existence aims at some sort of good. Aristotle lists 3 kinds of goods, and those 3 are pleasure, political life, and contemplation. In chapter 5, Aristotle says, things spoken of before are more properly ends, since they provide contentment on account of themselves. So what he's going to do is he's going to find something that is an end in itself, and that is what is going to be the supreme good. So in relation to those 3 things that I just mentioned, pleasure, political life, and contemplation, Aristotle explains that politics aim at some sort of supreme good because the goal is to better the welfare of citizens, and it helps them fulfill noble virtues through politics, lawmaking, as well as education. And that, as a whole, helps people become virtuous. In chapter 7, Aristotle brings up the question, what is good, what is a common good for the masses, and we all know the problematic nature of that, because everybody has their own idea of what's good and what works for them. So Aristotle says, although this is so, we can all agree, hopefully, that goodness is at the end of all things. So everything that we try to accomplish in life is for the sake of good, something that's good. For example, money is not a common good because it's used to attain a goal outside of itself, as is working on an action to attain a certain goal. Working is not the goal in itself. So in relation to that, that is why goodness is the ultimate goal, because it's an end in itself. That is what is worked for when going out daily chores. For example, another example would be, people work, but the action of working is not in itself the goal. It's to achieve a higher goal, which usually is happiness. In Book 2, Aristotle identifies ethical virtue as a habit disposed toward action by deliberate choice, being at the mean relative to us. So being virtuous is a mean virtue that is contingent upon persistence and practice of virtue, and is perfected by habituation. And in chapter 1 of 2 of Book 2, Aristotle notes that virtue is good in itself and is learned for people, those that are not naturally good. And in order for them to perfect their virtue, it's learned by habituation. So he's just further explaining why habituation is necessary, even if you are naturally inclined to be good. Aristotle goes on to say, we become just by doing things that are just, temperate by doing things that are temperate, and courageous by doing things that are courageous. So he's just further asserting the necessity to be moderate and to continue in a life of virtue, or practice towards it. In chapter 2, he says temperance and courage are destroyed by excess and deficiency, which are presented by an intermediate condition. So, again, moderation is key. In chapter 5, Aristotle he questions what is virtue. And he says, virtues are neither feelings nor predispositions, but active conditions. And what an active condition is, Aristotle says it's the virtue of a human being. The virtue of a human being would be the active condition from which one becomes good, and from which one will yield up one's work well. So, virtue is an active condition that makes one apt at choosing, consisting in a mean condition in relation to us, which is determined by proportion, and by the means by which a person with practical judgment would determine it. And it is a mean condition between 2 vices, one that results from excess, and the other resulting from deficiency. So, virtue is always going to be the mean condition. So, to elaborate further on a conceptual balance beam, fear would be on one end, and with confidence being on another, the mean condition, or the virtue, would be courage. So to Aristotle, the mean condition of the soul is always going to be the greatest, hence why virtue is a mean condition, and the excess or deficiency is always going to be the vice. In Book 3, Aristotle begins to say an individual of serious moral stature is distinct in his actions for his ability to see what substance there is. Temptations may be strong and a virtuous person, but they won't let it get to his or herself, and that won't distort their judgment. Actions are governed by the spirited part of the soul which possesses our desires. Virtue is contingent upon directing natural desires and impulses for the right reason. So, for example, to show courage when it is needed, and then one will need to determine when to be moderate and to not stray from the excess or the deficiency, but rather stay in the middle and be in accord with reason, essentially. So, through this, we can see how Aristotle stresses reason and intellect. So, the whole idea based around the good life, which is this life of these complete virtues, it's based almost completely upon reason and being able to judge properly and the intellect.